If my stepmother had not cornered me in the dining room over a few drops of spilled Earl Grey, my father would still be living under her thumb. She thought she was just disciplining her clumsy stepdaughter like she did when I was 15, unaware that the hallway shadows were not empty. She had no idea my cousin was standing right behind her, holding a phone that was recording every single vicious word. My name is Kaylee Walker, and if you looked at my personnel file at Horizon Analytics, you would see a woman who deals in absolute certainties. As the data analytics lead for one of the fastest-growing tech firms in Harborview, my life is built on rows, columns, and predictive models that tell you exactly what is going to happen next if you just pay attention to the patterns. I am 30 years old. I own a 2-bedroom apartment in the city center that I paid for with my own money, and I have a credit score that would make a loan officer weep with joy. I am stable. I am successful. I am in control. But as I turned my car off the main coastal highway and onto the gravel driveway that led to my father's house, I felt that familiar, nauseating slide back into being 12 years old and helpless. The gravel crunched under my tires, a sound that used to signal the end of my freedom every day after school. The house sat on a rise overlooking the Atlantic, a picture-perfect 2-story colonial with white clapboard siding that gleamed in the late afternoon sun. The lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life. The hydrangeas were aggressively blue, and the windows glowed with the warm, inviting amber light of expensive lamps. To a stranger, or even a neighbor, it looked like the setting for a holiday greeting card. It looked like safety. I killed the engine and sat in the silence for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. To me, that house did not look like safety. It looked like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided before I even walked through the door. My stepmother, Vivian Ellison, had sent the invitation 3 days ago. It was not a request. It was a summons wrapped in the guise of maternal affection. She had called it a family reconciliation dinner, a chance to bridge the gap that had widened over the last decade. She said it was time to put the past behind us, especially now that I was doing so well for myself. She said my father missed me. That was the hook she always used, the bait she knew I could not ignore. My father, Greg Ellison, was a good man who had slowly, over the last 15 years, dissolved into the background of his own life. He was the ghost haunting his own home, a silent figure who drifted through rooms controlled entirely by his wife. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked calm. My blouse was pressed, my hair was pulled back in a professional clip, and my makeup was flawless. I looked like a woman who could not be hurt. That was the armor I needed. I took a deep breath of the salty air coming off the ocean, trying to fill my lungs with something clean before I stepped into the stifling atmosphere of the Ellison household. When I opened the front door, the smell hit me instantly. It was a blend of lavender floor wax and Vivian's signature perfume, a heavy floral scent that clung to everything. It was the smell of judgment. My stomach tightened reflexively. There were no physical scars on my body from my childhood in this house. Vivian did not believe in hitting. She believed in something far more effective. She believed in the surgical removal of self-esteem. I remembered the mantra she used to repeat when I was a teenager, usually while hovering over me as I scrubbed a counter that was already clean or refolded a towel that was not perfectly aligned. One small mistake says everything about who you are. Kaylee. It was never about the mistake. It was never about the B+ on a report card or the scuff on a shoe. It was about establishing a hierarchy where she was the judge and I was the perpetual defendant. She used words like a scalpel, slicing away my confidence piece by piece until I was convinced that I was fundamentally flawed, that I took up too much space, that I was lucky she even tolerated my presence. My father would stand in the corner, reading his newspaper or checking his watch, hearing everything but saying nothing. His silence was not neutral. It was an endorsement. I learned very quickly that in the ecosystem of this house, there were predators and there was prey. And there was no one coming to save the prey. Kaylee, you made it! Vivian appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a pristine white apron. She was 55 but looked 10 years younger. Maintained by a rigorous regimen of skincare and the vitality she drained from everyone around her, her smile was wide, showing too many teeth. But it did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were cold, calculating scanners that were already assessing my outfit, my weight, and my posture. "Hello, Vivian," I said, keeping my voice level. The traffic coming out of Harborview was manageable. "Well, aren't you looking professional?" she said, the pause intentionally placed to suggest that professional was a synonym for drab. She stepped forward and offered a cheek for a kiss, not an embrace. I leaned in, careful not to actually touch her skin, engaging in the air kiss ritual we had perfected. "Hi, sweetie," my dad's voice came from the living room. He walked out, looking tired. He always looked tired these days. His shoulders were slumped, and his cardigan seemed a size too big, as if he was shrinking inside his clothes. He gave me a hug, and for a second, I felt the genuine warmth of the father I used to have before my mother died, before Vivian arrived. But then he pulled away quickly, glancing at Vivian as if checking for permission to be affectionate. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. "You look good." "I'm fine, just fine," he mumbled, his eyes darting away. "Vivian made a pot roast, your favorite." "It hasn't been my favorite since I was 12, Greg," Vivian corrected him lightly, her tone teasing, but the undercurrent sharp. "Kaylee has a more sophisticated palate now that she's a big city executive. Pot roast is probably too rustic for her." "It smells delicious," I lied. "And I'm hardly a big city executive. Harborview is barely a metropolis." "Oh, don't be modest," Vivian said, turning to lead us into the living room. "We heard all about your promotion. Head of data? Something?" "Data analytics," I said. "Right, watching numbers on a screen. And that new apartment downtown. Greg told me you paid a fortune for it. Must be nice to have that kind of disposable income while your father and I are trying to be prudent with our retirement." There it was, the jab, the reminder that my success was somehow an insult to them, a sign of selfishness. A few years ago, that comment would have made me apologize. It would have made me offer to pay for dinner or write a check for some imaginary household expense she claimed they couldn't afford. But I was not that girl anymore. I walked into the living room and saw the wild card Vivian had thrown into the mix. Sitting on the beige sofa, looking entirely out of place, was my cousin Lena. "Lena?" I stopped, genuinely surprised. Lena Ward looked up from her phone. She was wearing jeans and a black blazer, her dark hair cut in a sharp bob. Lena lived 3 states away. We rarely saw each other in person, but she had been the only lifeline I had growing up. When Vivian would lock me in my room for attitude adjustment, which just meant sitting in silence for 4 hours, Lena was the one who would sneak text messages to me. She knew. She was the only one who truly knew. "Surprise," Lena said, her voice dry. She stood up and hugged me, squeezing my arm hard. A signal. Aunt Vivian insisted I drive down, said it was a family reunion and wouldn't take no for an answer. "I thought it would be nice," Vivian said from the doorway, clasping her hands. "Lena hasn't seen the house in years, and since you girls used to be so close, I thought having her here would make the evening more festive." I looked at Lena. Her face was composed, but her eyes were alert. She was scanning the room, noting the position of the furniture, the exits, the mood. Lena was a paralegal now, sharp as a tack, and completely intolerant of nonsense. Her presence here changed the dynamic. Vivian likely brought her as an audience, thinking Lena's presence would force me to be polite and compliant, or perhaps to show off her happy family tableau to a relative. Vivian didn't know that Lena and I spoke every week. She didn't know that Lena was the one who had told me, "You have to stop protecting them. Kaylee, you have to protect yourself." "It's great to see you, Lena," I said, and I meant it. Really great. The atmosphere in the living room was suffocatingly tense. Vivian moved around adjusting coasters and fluffing pillows that didn't need fluffing. Greg sat in his armchair, staring at the unlit fireplace. Lena sat back on the sofa, watching Vivian with the intensity of a bird of prey waiting for a mouse to break cover. "So," Vivian said, perching on the edge of the love seat, "tell us about the apartment. Kaylee, is it true you have a view of the harbor? That must cost a pretty penny. Your father was just saying last week how much the property taxes have gone up on this place. It's a struggle, really." "The apartment is nice," I said, ignoring the bait about the taxes. "It's close to work. Must be nice to just buy things when you want them." Vivian sighed. "We've been needing to redo the roof for 2 years, but you know how it is. Money goes out faster than it comes in, especially when you don't have children sending help." My father flinched. "Vivian, please, let's not talk about money tonight. I'm just saying, Greg," she said, her voice turning syrupy sweet but poisonous, "Kaylee is doing so well. It's a proud moment for us, even if she is a bit distant." I sat there, hands folded in my lap, feeling the old rage simmering in my chest. But unlike the rage of my teenage years, which was hot and chaotic, this rage was cold. It was structured. It was data. Vivian thought this was just another night where she would pick at me until I bled, and I would take it to keep the peace. She thought she was the only one playing a game. She had no idea that I had spent the last 6 months gathering files. She didn't know about the screenshots of bank transfers I had on my encrypted drive. She didn't know that my promotion at Horizon meant I now had access to forensic accounting tools that could trace where every dollar of my father's pension was actually going. And she certainly didn't know that this dinner was not a reconciliation. It was a sting operation. I looked at Lena. She gave me a microscopic nod. It was time to start the sequence. "I can help with dinner," I offered, standing up. "Is everything ready?" "Oh, almost," Vivian said, standing up as well. "Actually, could you be a dear? I made a pot of tea. It's on the counter in the kitchen. Bring it out on the tray? We can have a cup before we eat. It's Earl Grey. Your father likes a cup to settle his stomach." "Sure," I said. I walked into the kitchen. It was pristine, of course. White marble counters, stainless steel appliances that looked like they had never been used. The tea set was waiting on a silver tray. It was fine china, delicate and floral. Sitting on a lace doily, the teapot was steaming. I stared at the tray. The memory hit me so hard I almost gasped. I was 15. I was carrying a tray just like this. I had tripped on the edge of the rug. The hot tea had splashed onto the hardwood floor. Not even the carpet, just the wood. Vivian had screamed. She had cornered me against the refrigerator. Her face inches from mine, gripping my wrist until I lost circulation, hissing that I was clumsy, stupid, a disaster of a girl who ruined everything she touched. My father had been in the other room. He had heard the scream. He had done nothing. That incident had been the turning point. That was the day I realized that no matter how hard I tried to be perfect, I would always be the villain in her story. I reached out and lifted the heavy silver tray. The china rattled softly. The steam rose up, smelling of bergamot. My hands were shaking. Part of it was the somatic memory of fear, the body remembering what it felt like to be small and threatened, but part of it was adrenaline. I wasn't 15 anymore. I was a 30-year-old woman with a plan. I knew exactly where the new Persian rug was in the dining room. I knew exactly how much Vivian prized it. She had bragged on Facebook that it cost $5,000. I took a breath. This was the point of no return. The plan required a catalyst. It required Vivian to drop her mask in front of a witness. It required a moment of clumsiness that would trigger the monster she kept hidden beneath the surface of the doting wife. I walked toward the dining room, the tray balanced in my hands. "Here comes the tea," I called out, my voice steady despite the pounding in my ears. I stepped through the doorway. The dining room was dimly lit. The expensive rug spread out like a target beneath the table. Vivian was sitting there, watching me, waiting for me to serve her. I knew what I had to do. Just one slip, just one drop. If I spilled this tea, the evening would explode. The carefully constructed facade of the happy Ellison family would shatter. Vivian would react. She wouldn't be able to help herself. And this time, Unlike all the times in the dark past, the eyes watching from the shadows wouldn't just be my father's cowardly gaze. I tightened my grip on the handles, felt the heat of the teapot radiating against my palms, and took the step that would burn everything down. As I walked toward the dining room with the silver tray heavy in my hands, the distance between the kitchen and the table felt like it spanned 15 years. The hallway was a tunnel through time. With every step, the confident 30-year-old data analyst peeled away, and the terrified teenager underneath began to surface. It was involuntary. It was the way the house remembered me, even if I had tried to forget it. The memories here did not play out like a movie. They hit like physical sensations, a tightness in the chest, a dryness in the throat, the instinct to make myself as small as humanly possible. When I was 13, a year after my mother died and Vivian moved in, I learned that silence was my only defense. Vivian did not scream often. Screaming was messy, and Vivian Ellison was nothing if not immaculate. Her cruelty was quiet. It was a look across the dinner table that said, "You are disgusting," while she politely asked if I wanted more peas. It was the way she would rewash every dish I had just cleaned, sighing loudly enough for my father to hear in the next room, signaling that I was incompetent without ever saying the word. She specialized in the public performance of discipline. I remembered a Thanksgiving when I was 14. My aunt and uncle were visiting. We were all seated, and I had worn a dress I bought with money I saved from babysitting. It was a little too big, perhaps not the most fashionable, but I felt proud of it. Vivian had waited until everyone was served, until the conversation lulled, and then she smiled at me. "Kaylee," she had said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I think it is so brave of you to wear that. Most girls your age would be so embarrassed to be seen in something so frumpy, but you just do not care about your appearance at all, do you? It is refreshing." The table had gone silent. My face had burned so hot I thought my skin would peel off. My father had just chewed his turkey, eyes fixed on his plate. I had spent the rest of the meal staring at the tablecloth, wishing I could dissolve into the fibers. That was her method. She did not leave bruises. She planted seeds of shame that grew into forests of self-loathing. But the memory that was vibrating in my hands right now, causing the teacups to rattle ever so slightly, was from when I was 15. It was a Saturday. The sun had been shining then, too. I had been bringing tea to the living room. Just like this. I had been rushing because I wanted to go meet a friend at the library, and Vivian had told me I could not leave until her tea was served perfectly. I had tripped. It was a small stumble, my sneaker catching on the edge of the runner rug. The tea sloshed. It did not even hit the carpet. It splashed onto the hardwood floor and a little bit onto the leg of the coffee table. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Vivian had moved faster than I thought possible. She was on me before I could even reach for a napkin. She grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into the soft skin on the underside of my arm. She squeezed so hard my fingers went numb. She pulled me close, her face inches from mine. I could smell her perfume, that cloying floral scent that now made me nauseous, mixed with the mint of her breath. "Look at you," she had hissed, her voice a low, guttural growl that nobody else ever heard. "You are a disaster. You ruin everything you touch. Look at this mess. This is why you will never be anything. Kaylee, you are careless and stupid and broken." I had started to cry, shaking, terrified that she was going to hit me. She raised her other hand, and I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut. But then the floorboards creaked in the hallway. Vivian dropped my wrist instantly. By the time my father walked into the room 3 seconds later, she was standing 3 feet away from me, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression one of weary disappointment. "Oh, Greg," she had sighed, gesturing to the puddle. "Kaylee has had another accident. I do not know why she is so clumsy. I'm just worried she is going to burn herself one day." My father looked at me, then at the floor. "Be more careful. Kaylee," he had mumbled. "Listen to Vivian. She is trying to teach you." I had spent the next hour on my hands and knees, scrubbing the floor with a toothbrush. because Vivian said the tannins in the tea would ruin the wood grain if I did not get it out of the microscopic cracks. I scrubbed until my knees were bruised and my knuckles were raw, while she sat on the sofa reading a magazine, occasionally glancing over to tell me I missed a spot. That was the lesson I learned at 15. The truth did not matter. Only the narrative mattered. And in that house, Vivian wrote the narrative. I looked across the dining room now, in the present day. Vivian was arranging the napkins, playing the role of the perfect hostess. My father was pouring wine, his hand trembling slightly, a new development I had noticed recently. And Lena was there. Lena. I looked at my cousin, and another memory surfaced, one of the few bright spots in the dark timeline of my adolescence. Lena was 3 years older than me. She lived in Ohio, but one summer, her parents sent her to stay with us for 2 weeks while they dealt with a messy renovation. Lena was 16 then, bold and loud and everything I was afraid to be. 3 days into her visit, Vivian had started in on me. I had forgotten to fold the laundry immediately after the dryer buzzed. Vivian stood in the laundry room doorway, listing my failures, her voice calm and venomous. She told me I was lazy, that I was taking advantage of my father's generosity, that I was destined to be a leech on society. I stood there, taking it, head bowed, eyes on the linoleum. When Vivian finally finished and walked away, satisfied with her work, I turned around and saw Lena standing in the hallway. She had heard everything. I expected her to be uncomfortable. I expected her to look away. Instead, she walked into the laundry room, her face hard. She did not say anything at first. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her iPod and a pair of tangled white earphones. She put the earbuds in my ears and pressed play. It was some loud, angry punk rock song I had never heard before. Then she pulled one earbud out and leaned in close, whispering so Vivian would not hear. "You are not crazy. Kaylee, she is a witch. This house is messed up. Do not let her inside your head." That single moment had saved me. It was the first external validation I had ever received that I wasn't the problem. Lena had seen the monster behind the mask. Now, over a decade later, Lena caught my eye across the table. She didn't smile. She just tapped her index finger against the side of her phone, which was lying face down on the tablecloth. It was a tiny gesture, invisible to anyone else, but I knew what it meant. I am still here. I am still listening. I needed that reminder because the anger I felt now was not just about the emotional scars, it was about the theft. After my mother died, my father had been a shell. He wandered through his days in a fog of grief. Vivian had swooped in not just as a romantic partner, but as a manager. She told him he was too stressed to handle the bills. She told him she would take care of the paperwork so he could grieve. Greg Ellison, a man who had built a small but successful contracting business, handed over his checkbook, his passwords, and his autonomy. By the time I was applying for college, the control was absolute. I had been accepted to a prestigious university in Boston, my dream school. I remembered running to show my father the acceptance letter. He had smiled, a genuine smile, until Vivian walked in. She took the letter from his hands. She scanned it, her eyes narrowing. "We cannot afford this, Greg," she had said, tossing the letter onto the coffee table like it was junk mail. "Look at this tuition. It is selfish of her to even ask." But Mom left money for my education. I had argued, my voice shaking. There was a trust. Vivian had laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "That money went to paying off your mother's medical bills. Kaylee, there is nothing left. You will go to the state school, or you will get a job. We are not going into debt for your vanity." I found out years later, through my own investigation, that the medical bills had been fully covered by insurance. The trust fund had been drained, transferred in small increments to an account solely in Vivian's name, labeled Household Emergency Fund. I went to the state university. I worked 3 jobs. I took out loans, and I got out. I majored in data analytics because numbers made sense to me. People lied. People manipulated. People presented a face to the world that masked their true intentions. But data? Data left a trail. Every transaction, every login, Every deleted email left a ghost behind it. If you knew how to look, you could find the truth buried in the zeros and ones. I became obsessed with security. I learned about encryption. I learned how to recover deleted files. I learned that the difference between a victim and a survivor was often just a matter of evidence. While I was building my career, pulling myself up from the financial hole I started in, Vivian was busy rewriting history. She told my aunts and uncles that I had abandoned them. She told the neighbors that I was an ungrateful brat who never called, who was too busy with her fancy city life to care about her aging father. My Aunt Sarah had called me once, 2 years ago, drunk on Christmas Eve. "Kaylee," she had slurred, "your father is heartbroken. Vivian says you haven't visited in 6 months. Why are you so cold?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I called every Sunday, but Vivian always said Dad was sleeping, or out, or in the shower. I wanted to tell her that I sent money. The money, that was the final straw. For the last 3 years, Vivian had been texting me with increasing urgency. "Your father needs dental work. The furnace broke. We have a tax lien." I sent checks. I wired cash. I wanted to help my dad. I thought I was being a good daughter. But 6 months ago, I ran a background check on my father's credit report, something I could do easily with my access at Horizon. I expected to see debt. I expected to see struggle. Instead, I saw a mortgage that had been refinanced 3 times, pulling out hundreds of thousands of dollars of equity. I saw credit cards in my father's name maxed out at luxury boutiques, travel agencies, and high-end furniture stores. I looked at the photos Vivian posted on Facebook. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet in one. In another, she was checking in at a 5-star spa in Arizona while claiming to be visiting a sick relative. My father was wearing the same frayed cardigan he had worn for 5 years. The roof of the house, which she claimed was leaking, had not been touched. The money I sent for his dental work? There was no record of a dentist visit on his insurance, but there was a charge for a cosmetic dermatology clinic on Vivian's card the same week I wired the funds. She was eating him alive. She was draining his life's work, his credit, and his dignity, all while painting herself as the martyr and me as the villain. I realized then that simply staying away was not enough. My silence was not a neutral act. My silence was collusion. By staying away, by protecting my own peace, I was allowing her to victimize the only parent I had left. And worse, I knew how these pathologies worked. If she finished draining my father, she would move on, maybe to a niece, maybe to a grandchild if I ever had one. Predators do not stop because they are full. They stop when they are caught. I stood at the threshold of the dining room. The tea tray was heavy, but my resolve was heavier. I looked at the back of Vivian's head. She was saying something to Lena about how hard it was to find good help these days. I took a breath. I adjusted my grip on the tray. I was not the 15-year-old girl who scrubbed the floor with a toothbrush anymore. I was the head of data analytics at Horizon. I hunted anomalies for a living. I exposed corruption in lines of code. And tonight, I was going to expose the corruption sitting at the head of this table. I would play her game one last time. I would be the clumsy, disappointing stepdaughter. I would give her exactly what she wanted, a reason to strike. But this time, the strike would not land on a frightened child. It would land on a tripwire. I stepped onto the rug. "Here is the tea," I said, and I prepared to let it fall. The dinner began with the precision of a military operation disguised as a casual family meal. We sat at the long mahogany table, the same one I used to polish with lemon oil every Saturday morning until my cuticles burned. The roast beef was perfectly cooked, pink in the center, resting on a bed of roasted root vegetables that glistened with glaze. It was a meal designed to be photographed, not just eaten. Vivian sat at the foot of the table, opposite my father, positioning herself as the anchor of the conversation. I sat across from Lena. The air between us was thick with the scent of rosemary and unspoken animosity. For the first 20 minutes, Vivian played the role of the benevolent matriarch to perfection. She spooned potatoes onto my father's plate, fussing over his portion size, asking him if the meat was tender enough for his digestion. It was a performance of care that barely masked the control she exerted over his every bodily function. Then, she turned her attention to Lena. "You know, Lena, having you here reminds me so much of when the girls were teenagers," Vivian said, her voice light and airy, like she was recalling a fond memory of a summer vacation. "Kaylee was always such a handful back then. Do you remember the time she tried to bake a cake for Greg's birthday?" I stiffened, fork hovering halfway to my mouth. I remembered it vividly. I was 14. I had spent 3 hours making a chocolate cake from scratch, following my mother's old recipe card. It had come out slightly lopsided, but it tasted good. Vivian had taken one look at it, laughed, and told me it looked like a mudslide. She had thrown it in the trash before my father even got home, claiming she did not want him to get food poisoning, and replaced it with a store-bought tart. "Oh, it was a disaster," Vivian continued, laughing softly as she dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin. "She used salt instead of sugar. Can you imagine? We had to throw the whole thing out. The kitchen was covered in flour for days. I think I was finding cocoa powder in the grout for a month." That is not what happened, I thought, but I kept my face neutral. I took a small bite of the roast beef. It tasted like sawdust. "Kaylee was always a bit scatterbrained," Vivian went on, pouring more wine into Lena's glass. "She just lacked that attention to detail. I used to tell her, 'Kaylee, if you cannot handle the small things, how will you ever handle the big things?' I suppose that is why I was so surprised to hear about your promotion. Dear, data analysis requires so much precision. I hope you have a good team checking your work." She smiled at me, a beatific expression that dared me to contradict her. "I actually lead the team, Vivian," I said, keeping my voice level. "My work is double-blind audited. My error rate is 0.01%. Vivian waved her hand dismissively. "Well, isn't that wonderful? Computers do so much of the work these days, don't they? It is a blessing for people who struggle with focus." I saw Lena's hand tighten around her wine glass. Her knuckles were white. She looked ready to snap, to defend me the way she had when we were kids. But I caught her eye and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of my head. "Wait," my eyes said. "Stick to the plan." I was running a mental checklist in my head. The small, motion-activated camera I had planted in the living room bookshelf was disguised as a USB charger block plugged into the wall behind the armchair. It had a wide-angle lens. It captured the entire seating area and the entrance to the dining room. I had tested the battery life and the storage capacity 3 times before I left my apartment. The trap was set. I just needed to lure the beast into the cage. We finished the meal in a tension that was almost vibrating. My father barely spoke, only murmuring agreement whenever Vivian made a point about the weather or the neighbors. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by years of having his opinions surgically removed by his wife's passive aggression. "Let us move to the living room for tea," Vivian announced, clapping her hands together lightly. "Kaylee, be a dear and bring the tray in." I set it up on the sideboard. This was it. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that defied my calm exterior. This was the trigger point. This was the moment I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times on the drive over. I walked to the sideboard. The silver tray was waiting. The teapot was hot to the touch. The china cups rattled softly as I lifted the heavy silver handles. Vivian stopped in the doorway, turning back to look at me. Her eyes narrowed, scanning my hands, my posture, looking for a flaw she could exploit. "Careful now," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its dinner party sweetness. "Do not be clumsy like last time. That rug in the living room is Persian silk. It cost more than your first car. We do not want a repeat of history, do we?" The words hit me like a physical blow. "Don't be clumsy like last time." It was the exact phrase she had used when I was 16, right before she locked me out of the house in a thunderstorm because I had tracked mud into the foyer. It was the phrase that reduced me to a trembling child, desperate for approval, terrified of making a mistake. But I was not 16, I was 30, and I was holding the tray not because I was obedient, but because I was armed. I walked toward the living room. The carpet beneath my feet changed from the hardwood of the hallway to the plush, expensive wool of the living room rug. It was cream-colored with a delicate floral pattern in pale blue. It was immaculate. It was Vivian's pride and joy, a symbol of the status she desperately tried to project to the world. My father was already seated in his armchair. Lena was moving toward the sofa, but she paused, lingering near the hallway entrance. I walked slowly, step by step. I could feel Vivian watching me like a hawk, waiting for me to fail. She wanted me to fail. She needed me to fail so she could reaffirm her superiority, so she could prove to Lena and my father that I was still the incompetent child she had spent years describing. I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. I was 3 feet away from the coffee table. I felt the weight of the teapot shifting. In the past, I would have tensed up, trying to overcorrect, which usually led to the very accidents I was trying to avoid. This time, I simply relaxed my right wrist. It was a subtle movement, invisible to the naked eye. I let the heavy silver tray dip just a fraction of an inch to the right. The porcelain teapot slid. It hit the rim of the teacup. The sound was sharp, clink, clatter. "Oh," I gasped, feigning a loss of balance. The teapot tipped. The lid rattled off. A stream of dark, steaming Earl Grey tea surged over the lip of the pot. It missed the tray entirely. It hit the cream-colored rug with a wet slap. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the dark amber liquid splash against the pristine wool fibers. It soaked in instantly, spreading outward like a dark bruise on perfect skin. Steam rose from the stain, curling into the air. A few drops splattered onto the polished wood of the coffee table leg. For 1 second, there was absolute silence in the room. Then, the atmosphere shattered. Vivian's face transformed. The polite, smiling hostess vanished, replaced by a visage of pure, unadulterated rage. Her eyes went wide, and her mouth twisted into a snarl. "You stupid girl!" she shrieked. The volume of her voice made my father jump in his chair. Vivian didn't just walk. She lunged. She crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, invading my personal space so aggressively that I had to take a stumbling step back. "Look what you did!" she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the rug. "Look at it! I told you to be careful. I told you!" I stood there, holding the now lighter tray, my hands trembling, partly from the adrenaline of the act, and partly from the genuine, conditioned fear that roared back to life in the face of her aggression. I'm sorry," I stammered, keeping my voice low. It slipped. The handle was hot. "It slipped?" Vivian mocked, her voice dripping with venom. She stepped closer, until I could feel the heat of her body, smell the sourness of her breath beneath the perfume. "You are pathetic. You are 30 years old and you cannot even carry a tray of tea without destroying my home?" "Vivian, please," I said, shrinking back. "It was an accident. I will pay to have it cleaned." "Cleaned? You think you can clean this?" she hissed, jabbing her finger toward my face. "This is silk. You idiot. You have ruined it. You ruin everything. You have been a burden on this family since the day you walked in here." The words hung in the air, ugly and raw. A burden. My father stood up, his hands shaking. "Vivian, honey," he said, his voice weak and wavering. "It is just tea. Just a few drops. We can call the carpet cleaners." Vivian whipped her head around to look at him, her eyes blazing. "Shut up. Greg, do not defend her. You always baby her, and look at the result. She is a useless, clumsy disaster. She did this on purpose. Look at her. She is jealous because she knows she doesn't belong in a house like this. She wanted to embarrass me in front of her cousin." She turned back to me, her face contorted. "That is it, isn't it? You are just a spiteful, jealous little brat." I did not answer. I stood perfectly still, letting the insults wash over me. Every word she spoke was a nail in her own coffin. Every shout was being captured by the camera behind the armchair. But there was another angle. I needed the other angle. A chill ran down my spine. a cold sensation that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I slowly lifted my head. I looked past Vivian's heaving shoulders. I looked past my father, who had sunk back into his chair, covering his face with his hand. I looked toward the hallway. Lena was there. She was standing half behind the doorframe, partially obscured by the shadows. She wasn't moving. She wasn't rushing to intervene. She wasn't shouting at Vivian to stop. She was holding her phone up. The device was held steady at chest level. On the back of the phone, next to the camera lens, a tiny light was glowing. Our eyes met across the room, in the chaos of Vivian's shouting, in the suffocating atmosphere of the room. Lena's gaze was an anchor. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply blinked. A slow, deliberate movement. "I have it," her eyes said. "I see you. I see her. It is all here." The title of the story of my life, the one I had been writing in my head for years, suddenly manifested in reality. Stepmother beat me for spilling tea. Then I saw my cousin, recording from the hallway. Vivian was still screaming, oblivious to the lens aimed at her back. "You need to be taught a lesson," she spat, stepping so close that her nose almost touched mine. "You think because you have some little job in the city you are better than us? You are nothing. You are the same disrespectful child you always were. Maybe if I had been harder on you back then, you would not be such a failure now." She raised her hand. For a split second, I thought she was going to strike me. I saw the impulse twitch in her shoulder muscle, but she stopped herself, clenching her hand into a fist at her side. She knew where the line was. She knew not to leave a mark. But she didn't know that marks didn't have to be physical to be evidence. My heart was pounding, but my mind was crystal clear. The fear that usually paralyzed me was gone, replaced by a cold, hard satisfaction. I looked at Vivian, really looked at her, seeing the ugliness of her soul laid bare. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Vivian," I said softly, my voice steady enough for the microphone to pick up. "Don't you dare speak back to me!" she screamed. I took a deep breath. I didn't need to speak back. I didn't need to fight. Years ago, I would have been on the floor, sobbing, begging for forgiveness, waiting for the emotional blow that would crush me for weeks. I would have been trembling, waiting for the invisible hand to strike my spirit. But today, I stood my ground. I stood amidst the spilled tea and the ruined rug and the wreckage of my family dinner, and I felt a strange, powerful peace. Because I knew that 10 feet away, in the shadows of the hallway, there was an unblinking eye, an eye that was capturing every spit-flecked insult, every cruel gesture, every ounce of the hatred Vivian had hidden for so long. She thought she was screaming into the void, into the silence of a house she controlled. She didn't know she was screaming into a record that would exist forever. I stood still. I let her scream, and silently, I thanked the tea for falling. The echo of Vivian's last shriek hung in the air, a physical, ugly thing. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of my father breathing unevenly in his armchair. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, Vivian's entire demeanor shifted. The transformation was grotesque in its speed. She took a deep, theatrical breath, patted her hair back into place, and smoothed the front of her silk blouse. The snarl vanished, replaced by a tight, brittle smile. She let out a short, forced laugh and turned to Lena, who was still standing in the hallway, her phone now conspicuously absent. "Oh, goodness," Vivian said, her voice high and airy. She gestured toward me as if I were a naughty toddler. "You see what I have to put up with? Lena? These children, so clumsy. You turn your back for 1 second, and it is a disaster. It is a good thing that rug is stain-resistant." She was trying to reframe the entire incident. She was painting her psychotic break as the exasperated, long-suffering reaction of a loving mother dealing with a difficult child. She was trying to make it a joke, an anecdote for later. But the poison was still in the air. We had all heard it. My father was pale, staring at the floor, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. I did not challenge her. I did not say, "You just screamed at me like a maniac." That was the old script. The new script required me to be something far more unnerving. Calm. I set the silver tray down on the coffee table. My hands perfectly steady now. I'm very sorry. Vivian, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It was completely my fault. I will get a cloth. I turned and walked to the kitchen, my back straight. I could feel her eyes on me. I knew, without having to see her face, that my lack of tears, my failure to crumble, was more confusing to her than any angry outburst would have been. I was not following the rules. I was not playing the victim. I returned with a bowl of warm, soapy water and a stack of clean white cloths. I knelt on the edge of the rug, just inches from the dark stain. No, no, Vivian said, rushing forward. Get up. You will only make it worse. You have done enough. Greg, get her out of the way. I will call the professionals tomorrow. She was not being kind. She was seizing control of the narrative again. She was the one who would fix the problem I had created. I stood up obediently. I am sorry. Dad, I said, looking at him. He just shook his head, looking miserable. It is all right. Kaylee, it is just a rug. Oh, it is not just a rug. Greg, Vivian snapped, her patience already wearing thin again. It was an anniversary present, but fine. It is done. Let us not speak of it again. The rest of the pot roast sat on the table, untouched. No one wanted to eat. The reconciliation dinner was officially over, choked to death by spilled tea and venom. We sat in the living room for another 20 minutes, a cold, heavy silence pressing down on us. Vivian tried to start a conversation about the local real estate market. Lena gave one-word answers. I said nothing. My father stared at the dark stain on the rug as if it were an open wound. Finally, Vivian stood up, her patience gone. I am going to clear the table, she announced. Greg, come help me with the plates. My father stood up like a man being led to the gallows and followed her into the dining room. The second their footsteps faded toward the kitchen, Lena was on her feet. She grabbed my elbow, her grip like steel. Outside, she whispered. Now. She pulled me through the living room, past the offensive rug, and slid open the glass door that led to the back porch. The night air was cold, smelling of salt and damp earth. It was a relief, like coming up for air after being held underwater. Lena pulled me to the far corner of the porch, out of sight of the kitchen window. She did not let go of my arm. She turned to me, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes blazing. I got it all. Kaylee, she whispered, her voice urgent. I got the whole thing, the screaming, the finger-pointing, her calling you a burden. I even got Greg sitting there and letting it happen. It is brutal. She was breathing hard, as if she had been the one who was attacked. Are you okay? She asked. I nodded, though I was shaking. It was the adrenaline crash. I got it. Did you get the audio? Clear as a bell, she said. She pulled her phone from her blazer pocket. But, Kaylee, she hesitated, looking at me with a new intensity. Are you absolutely 100% sure you want to go this far? This is not just a family spat anymore. This is evidence. I leaned back against the cold siding of the house. I knew this was not an accident. I knew Lena had not just happened to be there. Phone in hand, her presence, her actions, were the second half of a plan we had put in motion 3 weeks ago. The memory of our phone call was sharp in my mind. It had been late on a Tuesday night. I was at my apartment, staring at my laptop screen, my stomach in knots. I had just gotten off the phone with my father's bank. Using the power of attorney I had tricked him into signing last Christmas, telling him it was just in case of an emergency. I had found the household emergency fund, the one Vivian had created with my mother's trust. It was now a brokerage account, and it was not in my father's name. It was in the name of a shell corporation. Ellison Management, LLC, with Vivian as the sole proprietor. She was systematically transferring money from my father's pension and Social Security into it, then paying for her luxuries from the LLC account. She was building a nest egg, and she was doing it by draining my father dry. I had called Lena, my voice shaking with a rage so cold it burned. She is stealing from him, I had said, pacing my living room. She is moving all his assets. She is setting it up so that when he dies, or if he gets sick, she will have everything, and I will have nothing to take care of him with. Lena, ever the paralegal, had listened patiently. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "Okay, Kaylee," she said, her voice calm and practical. "I hear you. But here's the problem. What you have is a story about financial misappropriation. It is messy. She will say he gave her permission. She will say it was a joint decision. She will say you are a bitter stepdaughter trying to steal your inheritance. But it is not. I had insisted. He does not even know the LLC exists." "Prove it," Lena said simply. "What?" "Prove that he is not a willing participant. To a judge. This looks like a standard, if poorly planned. Estate strategy for a second marriage. What you need is to prove a pattern of coercion and control. You need to show that she is not his partner, but his handler. You need to show that he is afraid of her." "How can I possibly do that?" I asked, sinking onto my sofa. "You need to show what she is like when she thinks no one is looking." Lena said, "You need to show the verbal abuse, the intimidation, the way she controls the entire house. You said she always called you clumsy, right? That she had a thing about you spilling things?" The memory of the tea incident, the one at 15, had flashed in my mind. "Yes," I whispered. "Well," Lena said, "it sounds like you need to give her a reason to be herself again." The plan had formed from there, a dark and intricate piece of social engineering. I would use Vivian's own reconciliation dinner against her. I would invite Lena, framing it as my own olive branch. I would plant the charger cam in the living room as a backup, but the real evidence, the close-up, the undeniable proof, would have to come from Lena. I will create a diversion. Lena had said, "I will go to the restroom, just as you are serving tea. I will wait in the hall. When she blows, I will record. She will not even see me." And now, standing on the cold porch, the plan had worked. It had worked perfectly. Lena unlocked her phone and turned the screen toward me. Dimming the brightness, she pressed play. I watched the last 2 minutes unfold, this time from Lena's perspective. The angle was perfect. Looking over Vivian's shoulder directly at me, I saw myself flinch when Vivian jabbed her finger. I heard her voice, distorted by rage, spitting the words, burden and failure. And then I saw my father. He was in the corner of the frame, a blurry figure in his armchair. He was small, cowering. He put his head in his hands. He did not look up. He did not say a word. He just sat there and let it happen. Watching my own humiliation was difficult, but watching my father's cowardice was agonizing. A wave of nausea hit me. Lena was right. This video was brutal. It was not just an indictment of Vivian. It was an indictment of my father. It was proof of his silence, of the decades he had spent choosing his own comfort over his daughter's safety. I did not feel a sense of triumph. I did not feel victorious. I felt a profound and heavy sadness. This was not a game. This was my family, and it was rotten to the core. This video was the evidence I needed, but it was also a weapon that would wound everyone, including the man I was trying to save. I reached out and pressed the stop button. Lena looked at me, her expression serious. "So, I ask again, what is next? Are you going to send this to him? To an attorney?" "This," I said, tapping the phone, "this is just piece number 1. This is the emotional context. What is piece number 2? "Piece number 2 is the data," I said, the coldness returning to my voice. "This video proves the coercion. The bank statements prove the crime." I took a deep breath, tasting the salt in the air. I looked back through the glass door. I could see Vivian in the kitchen, wiping down a counter that was already clean. She looked smug, satisfied, as if she had just won a major victory. She thought she had put me back in my place. She thought she had re-established her dominance. I turned back to Lena, the last bit of my childhood fear burning away, replaced by the certainty of an analyst who has just seen the pattern confirm the hypothesis. The last time tea spilled in this house, I was 15 years old, and I was silenced. I spent the next decade believing I was the problem. I looked down at the dark screen of Lena's phone, at the reflection of my own face. This time, that spill is not the end of the conversation. It is the beginning of the end for all of it. The 40-minute drive from my father's house back to my apartment in downtown Harborview was a masterclass in emotional decompression. I drove with the windows down, the cold November air stinging my face, trying to physically blow the residue of that house off my skin. The smell of lavender and old perfume was still in my nostrils. The sound of Vivian's shriek still echoed in my ears. I left right after the confrontation. I had murmured something about an early morning at work, grabbed my coat, and walked out before Vivian could reassemble her mask of civility. My father had looked up, his face a mask of misery, but he didn't try to stop me. Lena had hugged me at the door, her hand pressing a small, cold piece of metal into my palm, a USB drive. "It's all on here," she had whispered. "The hallway video and the file from the charger cam, both angles. Go, be safe, call me." Now, I was safe. I parked my car in the secure underground garage of my building, took the elevator up to the 14th floor, and walked into my apartment. My home was the antithesis of my father's house, where his home was dark wood, heavy drapes, and the clutter of Vivian's curated antiques. Mine was glass, steel, and light. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the harbor, the lights of the container ships twinkling in the black water. The furniture was minimalist, the surfaces were clear, and the air smelled of nothing but clean air and coffee. There was no history here. There were no ghosts. It was a space I had built from nothing, for myself, and it was my fortress. I didn't turn on the living room lights. I walked straight to my home office, a small second bedroom I had converted into what my colleagues at Horizon would call a data hub. One wall was a massive whiteboard, currently covered in a complex flowchart I had been mapping out for a client's logistics problem. The other wall held a desk with 3 large, high-resolution monitors. This was my command center. This was where I made sense of the world. I sat down, the leather of my office chair cool against my back. I plugged Lena's USB drive into a port. My computer, a high-spec machine I had built myself, recognized it instantly. For a moment, I just stared at the 2 video files, hallway cam, MP4, and living room cam, MP4. This was not my father's house. This was my lab, and Vivian, my father, and I were no longer a family. We were data points. I opened a new project folder on my encrypted drive. I labeled it Project Ellison. I imported the videos. Then I opened the other files I had been gathering for the last 6 months. It had started when my father had called me, sounding confused. He had been trying to check his retirement account online, and the password was not working. He had asked Vivian, and she had brushed him off, saying she handled all that, and he shouldn't worry his pretty little head about it. The condescension in her quote made my blood run cold. "Can you just look into it for me, sweetie?" he had asked, his voice small. "Just to make sure everything is okay? You're so good with these computers." I had agreed. I had used my knowledge of his old passwords, my mother's birthday, his old Army serial number, and bypassed Vivian's security questions in under 5 minutes. I got in, and what I saw made me feel sick. He was supposed to have a healthy retirement fund, built from the sale of his contracting business. There should have been hundreds of thousands of dollars in it. There was barely $90,000 left. I had spent the next 3 months using the power of attorney I had convinced him to give me. Just for emergencies, Dad, to pull every statement, every transfer record, every check image for the last 5 years. Now, on my center monitor, I pulled up the spreadsheets I had built. I had every transaction mapped, categorized, and time-stamped. I put my headphones on and opened the text message history between Vivian and me, which I had backed up from my phone. I began to cross-reference. On screen 1, a text from Vivian, dated March 12th. "Kaylee, honey, your father is so stressed. The property tax bill is $2,000 more than we expected. We are in a real bind. Can you help your old dad out?" On screen 2, a wire transfer from my account to hers, dated March 13th, $2,000. On screen 3, my father's bank statement, dated March 15th, a transfer out of his retirement account, authorized by Vivian, $5,000. On screen 4, Vivian's credit card statement, which I had also managed to access. March 16th, a charge from Bayside Jewelers, $4,850. The tax bill, I discovered, had been paid on time, from their joint checking account, for the exact amount they had budgeted for. My $2,000 and $3,000 more from my father's retirement had become a new piece of jewelry. I went down the line. A text from Vivian, July 2nd. Dad had a fall. He needs a special MRI, and the insurance deductible is $4,000. We just do not have it. He is in so much pain. A wire from me, July 2nd. $4,000. A withdrawal from Dad's pension, July 3rd. $6,000. A credit card charge, July 5th. Deposit, Sunset Vista Villas, Arizona, $10,000. There was no MRI. There was no fall. I had checked his medical insurance records. He had not had so much as a checkup that month. But Vivian had spent a lovely week at a spa, according to her Facebook photos, which she had captioned, so needed this restorative trip after a stressful summer. Thank God for my loving, supportive husband. It went on and on. Dozens of instances. Over $100,000 of my father's money, and nearly $20,000 of mine, laundered through fake emergencies and household needs, all diverted to fund her lifestyle and, most terrifyingly, to make a down payment on a vacation property in Arizona that was in her name alone. I worked for hours. I took screenshots of the texts. I exported the bank statements as encrypted PDFs. I created a master file, a single document that laid out the timeline of the theft in excruciating, undeniable detail. I backed it all up to the encrypted hard drive on my desk, then made a second copy and uploaded it to a secure cloud server that only I, and now Lena, had the key to. At 3 a.m, I finally leaned back, my eyes burning. I had the what. The videos Lena had given me were the why. The videos showed a woman capable of profound psychological abuse. The bank statements showed a woman committing methodical financial fraud. I picked up my phone and sent a text to a number in Boston. Cole, I have a situation. It is bad. It is my family. I need your help. A reply came back 30 seconds later. I'm up. Call me. I dialed. Cole Ramirez and I had gone to college together. While I had gone into data, he had gone to law school. He was now a junior associate at a white shoe firm in Boston, specializing in family law and financial crimes. He was young, hungry, and brilliant. Kaylee, he said, his voice instantly alert. What's wrong? You sound wired. I am about to send you a password-protected file, I said, my voice flat. I need you to look at it. I need to know what my options are. What kind of options? My stepmother is liquidating my father's assets, and I think she's been abusing him for years. I have proof. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Send it. I'll call you back. I sent the link and the complex decryption key. I waited. I watched the lights of a container ship move slowly out of the harbor. 45 minutes later, my phone rang again. Cole's voice was different. The friendliness was gone, replaced by a cold, professional anger. I've seen the videos. Kaylee, he said. The one in the hallway is, my God, and I've reviewed the financial summaries. This isn't just a family dispute. This is textbook financial elder abuse. The transfers, the LLC she created. The fact that your father is clearly not of sound mind to consent to this is criminal. We can take this to the district attorney. We can petition for an emergency conservatorship over your father's estate. I closed my eyes. District attorney, conservatorship, criminal. The words were so much bigger, so much more final than I had been prepared for. If we go to the DA, I asked, my voice barely a whisper, what happens to him? To my dad? Cole sighed. It would be a media circus. Kaylee, local businessman bilked by scheming wife. He would be a witness. He would be forced to testify. He would be publicly humiliated. And given what I saw in that video, the state of him, I'm not sure he would survive it. I knew he was right. My father was a weak man, but he was also a proud one, being forced to admit, in a public court, that he had been duped, controlled, and financially castrated by his wife. It would kill him. I cannot do that to him, I said. This is not about revenge. Cole, not really. This is about protecting him, and it's about stopping her. I want to cut her out, not blow him up in the process. I want to give him a chance to save himself, a chance to choose. You want to hit Vivian, but give Greg a shield, he summarized. Yes, exactly. Cole was silent for a long moment. I heard him typing. Okay, he said finally. Okay, I think I have a different approach. We don't go public, we go private. We stage a non-hostile intervention, or rather, a hostile intervention disguised as a non-hostile one. What do you mean? You're going to call your father, Cole said, his voice picking up speed. You're going to tell him that after the unpleasantness at dinner. You're worried about his stress levels. You're going to say you want to help him get his financial affairs in order, to make his life easier. You're going to tell him you've retained a top-tier estate planning attorney in Boston, me, to help him update his will and his financial plan, all on your dime, a gift. I saw where this was going. And Vivian? She'll be suspicious, but her greed and her control-freak nature won't let her miss that meeting. She will insist on coming. She won't let your father meet with a lawyer alone, especially a lawyer you hired. She'll come to my office, thinking she's going to charm me and control the narrative, just like she does at home. And when she gets there? When she gets there, Cole said, his voice hardening, she'll find herself in a soundproof conference room, with a certified stenographer present, and a stack of her own bank statements on the table. We won't be discussing a will. We'll be discussing an ultimatum. We confront her with everything, the videos, the financial trail. We give her one chance to sign back every asset, dissolve the LLC, and agree to a post-nuptial agreement that strips her of all financial power, or we walk the entire file over to the DA's office that afternoon. It was brilliant. It was clean. It was a corporate takedown applied to a family problem. It gave my father a choice. He would see the evidence in a controlled setting, with a legal expert there to explain it. He could be the victim, or he could be the co-conspirator. The choice would be his. Yes, I said, a surge of adrenaline making me sit up straight. That's it. That's the one. When? Give me 48 hours to draft the documents, Cole said. You set the meeting for this Friday. We hung up. I stood and walked to the whiteboard. I erased the client's logistics flowchart. I picked up a black marker. At the top, I wrote, Project Ellison, Final Phase. I began to draw a new chart. I drew a timeline, date Greg signs, financial POA, date of first suspicious transfer, date of text message, root canal, date of jewelry purchase, date of video, the tea incident. I worked until the sun came up, the gray light of dawn filling my office. The whiteboard was a web of dates, dollar amounts, and arrows, all pointing to one person. I looked at my desk. It was covered in evidence, the encrypted hard drive, the USB stick from Lena, printouts of bank statements with damning charges circled in red, my phone, with the text message, history. It was not a desk. It was a case file. It was everything I needed to reclaim my father's life and, in the process, end the hold my past had on me. I picked up the USB drive containing the video. I looked at the dark, cold metal. This was not a weapon of revenge. It was a shield. It was the final protective measure, and I was finally ready to use it. The 2 days between the dinner and the setup were the longest 72 hours of my life. I went to work at Horizon, sat in meetings, and ran queries on client data, all while a secret part of my brain was running a constant simulation of the meeting to come. I was polite to my colleagues. I drank my coffee. On the outside, I was just Kaylee Walker, analytics lead. On the inside, I was a general preparing for battle. On Wednesday afternoon, Exactly 24 hours after Cole had given me the green light, I stepped into a private, soundproof phone booth at my office. I pulled up my father's number on my cell and initiated a video call. It was part of the strategy. I wanted to see their faces. He picked up on the third ring. His face filled the screen, looking tired and gray. The background was the familiar beige of his living room armchair. "Kaylee, sweetie," he said, his voice hesitant. He looked like a man who was expecting to be yelled at. "Hi, Dad," I said, forcing my voice to be warm, full of the concern I genuinely felt for him, untainted by the anger I felt toward his weakness. "How are you feeling? That dinner, it got a little intense. I'm sorry about the rug." He waved his hand, a gesture of dismissal. "Oh, that. Don't you worry about that, Vivian. She was just upset. It's a very expensive rug. You know." "I know, Dad, and that's actually why I'm calling." I leaned into the camera, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial, caring tone. "I was really worried about you after that night. You seem so stressed, and Vivian mentioned how worried you both are about money, the taxes, the roof. It sounds like a lot to manage." He sighed, the weight of the world seeming to settle on his slumped shoulders. "It is, Kaylee. It's a lot. Vivian handles it, but she gets so overwhelmed, and I try to look at the paperwork, and it's all just numbers. I don't understand it anymore." This was the opening. He was admitting his confusion. He was vulnerable. "Dad, I want to help," I said softly. "I know I've been distant, but I'm here now. I have a friend from college, Cole Ramirez. He's an incredible lawyer in Boston, specializes in estate planning and financial management for families. I told him about you, and he's offered to sit down with all of us, review your retirement paperwork, look at the will, just to make sure you're protected and everything is optimized. No charge, just a favor to me." His face lit up with a relief so profound it almost broke my heart. "Really, sweetie? He'd do that? Oh, Kaylee, that would be such a weight off my mind. Just to have a professional look things over. Vivian is so good at it, but a second opinion, you know." "Of course, Dad. I'm happy to do it. What's all this, Greg?" Vivian's voice came from off-camera before she suddenly appeared, leaning into the frame. Her face was a mask of polite inquiry, but her eyes were sharp, suspicious slits. She had clearly been listening from just out of view. "Who are you talking to?" "It's Kaylee," Greg said, his voice full of false cheer. "She was just offering, well, tell her, Kaylee." I repeated the offer, this time directing it at her. "I was just telling Dad, Vivian, that I've arranged for a top financial lawyer in Boston to review your estate plan, free of charge, just to make sure you're both set up for the future, a gift from me." Vivian stared at me through the small screen. I could practically see the gears turning in her head. She was suspicious of the gesture. Why would the stepdaughter she had just verbally assaulted, be offering a gift? But at the same time, the words top lawyer, Boston, and free were irresistible to her, and the idea that I might try to talk to my father about money without her being present was an absolute impossibility. "Why, Kaylee," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "That is surprisingly thoughtful of you. Isn't that thoughtful, Greg?" Yes, very thoughtful," he beamed. "We would be happy to attend," Vivian continued, placing a proprietary hand on my father's shoulder. "Of course, I'll have to bring all of my files. I've spent the last 5 years organizing Greg's portfolio. It's all in perfect order, of course, but I'm sure a Boston lawyer will appreciate how meticulous my record-keeping is. Everything is already perfectly arranged. I'm very proud of the work I've done to protect our future." Bingo. She had taken the bait. Just as Cole had predicted. She was not just going to attend, she was going to walk into the trap carrying the evidence of her own crimes, convinced it was proof of her brilliance. "That's wonderful, Vivian," I said, my smile feeling like a steel plate. "The lawyer will be so glad you're so organized. How is Friday at 10 a.m.? Friday at 10 is perfect, she said, already looking at her calendar. We'll drive in. Oh, this will be good. Greg, we can finally get that will updated to reflect, our current situation. I knew what that meant. She meant updating it to cut me out completely. Great, I said. I'll send you the address. See you both on Friday. I ended the call and leaned my head back against the soundproof foam. I had done it. The trap was set. The targets had confirmed their attendance. My phone buzzed with a text from Lena. I had been messaging her and Cole in a secure, encrypted group chat. How'd it go? Lena wrote. Hook, line, and sinker, I replied. She's coming, and she's bringing her meticulous records. Cole's reply was simple. Good. The conference room is booked. I'm drafting the papers. Lena sent another message a minute later. Hang on. Sending you something to lighten the mood. You sound too much like a robot assassin. A second later, a file appeared in my inbox. It was a PDF document. I opened it. The title, in a mock-serious font, read, The Ellison Family, Official Code of Conduct, Revised Edition. I scrolled down. Lena had written out a list of rules in biting, sarcastic prose. 1. All culinary mistakes, e.g., lopsided cakes, spilled tea, breathing too loudly while chewing, are to be considered capital crimes, punishable by immediate and public psychological vivisection. 2. The matriarch, V.E., is not shouting. She is passionately expressing concern. Any attempt to correct this terminology will be met with more passionate concern. 3. The patriarch, G.E., must remain affixed to his designated armchair. His only approved lines are, Yes, dear, it's just a rug, an inaudible mumble of assent. 4. All financial contributions from the third-party offspring, KWW, will be accepted as due payment for services rendered, i.e., the trauma of raising her. Said funds will be immediately converted into assets that increase the matriarch's social standing. 5. Under no circumstances is the third-party offspring permitted to be successful, happy, or financially independent, as this is a direct and personal insult to the matriarch's life choices. I stared at the document, and a sound escaped my throat that I had not made in years. It was a short, sharp bark of laughter. It was genuine. The absurdity, the sheer theatrical dysfunction of it all, laid out in Lena's sharp, dark humor, broke the tension. You're insane. I texted her. You're welcome, she replied. Now go burn her to the ground. Metaphorically, we're paralegals, not arsonists, mostly. That small exchange did more for my nerves than any amount of meditation could have. I was not alone. I had Lena, with her gallows humor and her steady hand on the camera. I had Cole, with his sharp legal mind and his conference room of justice. I was not a scared teenager anymore. I was the leader of a very small, very specialized team. The next 36 hours were a blur of preparation. Cole sent me a copy of the draft agreement, a 10-page document that legally and financially disemboweled Vivian. It demanded the immediate dissolution of Ellison Management, LLC. It required the full and immediate return of all funds to a new, protected trust in my father's name. It included a post-nuptial agreement that waived all of Vivian's claims to his estate, his pension, and his home, in exchange for $1. It was brutal. It was beautiful. Meanwhile, Vivian was preparing, too. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was not reviewing bank statements. She was rehearsing her performance. She was digging up every memory of my teenage failings, every mistake I had ever made. She was preparing to paint me as an unstable, overly sensitive, and greedy daughter who was still bitter about her new mother. She was walking into a data-driven legal confrontation armed with a quiver of emotional insults. She thought she was coming to an argument. She had no idea she was coming to an audit. On Thursday night, the eve of the meeting, I could not sleep. I stood in my apartment, looking out at the dark water of the harbor. My whiteboard was clean again. The case file was locked in my fireproof briefcase. Everything was ready. All that was left was the human element. My father. I rehearsed the moment in my head. Cole would present the evidence, the videos, the spreadsheets, the timeline of deceit, and then Vivian would explode. She would deny. She would attack. She would cry. And my father, what would he do? I practiced the words I would say to him, not as an accusation, but as a question. I would turn to him in that quiet conference room after the storm broke, and I would ask him, "Dad, how does it feel to know that the money you earned for 40 years, the money Mom left for me, is not in your name anymore? How does it feel to see her call me a burden while she's wearing a bracelet you paid for with my college fund?" I had to be ready for his answer. He was a weak man. The pull of habit, the fear of being alone, might be stronger than the truth. He might choose her. He might look at all the evidence, the videos, the bank statements, and still choose the comfortable lie. I had to decide what I would do if that happened. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I saw the 30-year-old woman, the apartment she owned, the life she had built. If he chose Vivian, I would let Cole file the elder abuse report. I would walk away. I would cut the financial cord to them both, protect my own assets, and let the state handle the fallout. I would not light myself on fire to keep my father warm. Not if he was actively helping the person pouring gasoline on me. It was a cold, hard boundary, but it was the only thing that would keep me safe. I turned away from the window and went to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. The face staring back was tired, pale, and deeply anxious, but the eyes were hard. I thought about that day when I was 15, scrubbing the floor, crying, while Vivian read her magazine. I thought about the splash of hot tea on that cream-colored rug 2 nights ago. I took a deep breath. Tomorrow is not about avenging the past, I whispered to my reflection. It is about ensuring my future does not repeat it. The conference room at Cole's law firm was designed to intimidate. It was located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Boston, offering a panoramic view of the harbor that made the cars down on the street look like ants. The walls were soundproof glass. The carpet was a deep, serious gray, and the table was a slab of polished black granite that looked less like furniture and more like an altar where deals were sacrificed. Cole had set the stage perfectly. There were bottles of expensive sparkling water at each seat, fresh pots of coffee, and neat stacks of legal pads. But the air in the room was not welcoming. It was cold, sterile, and heavy with the unspoken threat of litigation. I sat on one side of the table, next to Lena. My father and Vivian sat opposite us. Vivian looked out of place in her floral blouse and excessive jewelry against the sharp, minimalist lines of the room, but she did not seem to know it. She had brought a thick, leather-bound binder, which she placed on the table with a heavy thud, staking her territory. Cole sat at the head of the table. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my father's car, and his expression was one of polite, shark-like interest. "Good morning, everyone," Cole said, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you for coming in. As Kaylee mentioned, I am here to help facilitate a review of Greg's estate planning and current financial health." Vivian cleared her throat immediately. Leaning forward, she flashed a bright, artificial smile at Cole. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Ramirez. I must say, it is very generous of Kaylee to arrange this, though I admit I was surprised. I have been managing Greg's accounts for 5 years now, and I dare say I have got everything running like a Swiss watch. I have optimized his portfolio for maximum growth and tax efficiency." She patted the binder. "I brought all the records," she continued. "Every receipt, every statement. I think you will find that I have done a much better job than a professional service could. I have had to, really. Greg gets overwhelmed so easily, and Kaylee, well, Kaylee has been so busy with her career in the city, she hasn't really had the time to be there for her father, but I have always been here." Cole nodded, not looking at the binder. "That is excellent. Mrs. Ellison, organization is key. However, my team and I have taken the liberty of pulling the raw data directly from the financial institutions to ensure we have the most up-to-date figures for our baseline." He tapped his tablet, and the large monitor mounted on the wall hummed to life. A spreadsheet appeared. It was not Vivian's curated version. It was my version. The raw truth. Vivian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she plastered it back on. Cole clasped his hands on the table. Our goal today is clarity. We want to make sure Greg understands exactly where his assets are, how they are performing, and who has access to them. Greg, does that sound good to you? My father nodded eagerly, looking relieved to be addressed. Yes, absolutely. I just want to make sure everything is safe, for Vivian and for Kaylee. Excellent, Cole said. Let us start with the primary operating account. He swiped on his tablet. The screen changed to show a series of wire transfers. They were highlighted in bright red. Mrs. Ellison, Cole said, his tone remaining conversational. I noticed a recurring pattern of transfers from Greg's primary pension fund into an entity called Ellison Management, LLC. Can you explain the structure of that entity for us? Vivian blinked. She had not expected him to find the LLC so quickly. She sat up straighter, adjusting her necklace. Oh, that, she said, letting out a dismissive little laugh. That is just a holding company I set up. It is a standard vehicle for tax purposes. We move the liquid cash there to shield it from certain liabilities. It is an investment strategy. I see, Cole said. And who are the signatories on Ellison Management, LLC? Vivian hesitated. Well, I am the managing partner, of course, to save Greg the paperwork. Cole looked at my father. Greg, are you aware of this LLC? Did you sign the incorporation papers? My father frowned, squinting at the screen. Ellison Management? I don't think so. Is that where the pension check goes? I thought it just went to the checking account. Vivian placed a hand over his, squeezing it. She leaned in close to him, her voice dropping to a condescending coo that made my skin crawl. Honey, we talked about this, remember? Last year? You were so tired that day. We sat at the kitchen table and I explained that we needed to move the money to keep it safe. You nodded. You agreed. I did? Greg looked confused. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for help. I don't remember that. Vivian turned back to Cole, sighing dramatically. You have to understand, Mr. Ramirez, Greg is getting older. His memory isn't what it used to be. He forgets things 5 minutes after we agree on them. It is a burden, really, but I handle it. I have to make these decisions because if I left it to him, we would be destitute. She was doing it right in front of us. She was gaslighting him, using his age as a weapon to invalidate his reality, all while playing the role of the long-suffering caretaker. Cole didn't blink. He just swiped the screen again. I understand, Cole said. Let us look at the disbursements from this LLC. If it is a savings vehicle, we would expect to see the capital preserved or invested in bonds or mutual funds. The screen filled with a new list. This time, the red lines were purchases. Bayside Jewelers, $4,800. Sunset Vista Villas, $10,000. Lux Automotive Leasing, $1,200. Sephora, $400. There was silence in the room. The list was long. It scrolled down the screen like a receipt for a life my father was not living. Greg, Cole asked softly, do you recall authorizing a $10,000 deposit for a vacation rental in Arizona last July? My father's jaw dropped. Arizona? No. I haven't been to Arizona in 20 years. Vivian flinched. That was an investment property, she said quickly, her voice rising in pitch. We were going to rent it out, to generate income. And the jewelry? Cole asked. Vivian's hand went to her throat, covering the diamond pendant she was wearing. That was a birthday gift. From Greg. He wanted me to have it. I didn't buy that. Viv, my father said, his voice shaking. I told you we couldn't afford gifts this year because of the tax bill. You told me we were broke. Vivian turned on him, her eyes flashing with sudden, vicious anger. You are broke. Greg, without me managing your money, you would be living in a cardboard box. You don't remember anything. I bought that necklace because I deserve it for putting up with your constant whining and your uselessness. The mask was slipping. The polite legal meeting was disintegrating, revealing the rot underneath. I decided it was time to speak. I leaned forward, placing my own file on the table. It was thin, just a few pages, but it was deadly. It is interesting you mentioned the tax bill. Vivian, I said quietly. She snapped her head toward me. Stay out of this. Kaylee, this is adult business. I ignored her. On March 12th, you texted me saying Dad was in a bind with property taxes. You asked for $2,000. I sent it. I looked at the screen. On March 16th, 4 days later, there is a charge for a weekend stay at the Grand Hotel in the city, $2,200. I looked her in the eye. And last July? You told me Dad had a fall. You said he needed an MRI and the insurance wouldn't cover it. I sent $4,000. I checked Dad's medical records this morning. There was no MRI, but there was that $10,000 deposit in Arizona. You took my money, combined it with Dad's pension, and bought yourself a timeshare. Vivian's face turned a blotchy red. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. How dare you, she hissed. You ungrateful, lying little brat. You have been spying on me? After everything I have done for this family? I took care of your father when nobody else wanted him. I cleaned his house. I cooked his meals. I managed his pathetic little life. And this is how you repay me? By dragging me into a lawyer's office and accusing me of stealing? She pointed a finger at me, the same aggressive gesture from the living room. You are just jealous, she shouted. You are a lonely, bitter girl who cannot stand to see her father happy. You are trying to manipulate him because you want his money for yourself. You are making all of this up. She was screaming now, her voice echoing off the glass walls. My father shrank into his chair, looking terrified. This was the Vivian he knew. This was the reality of his daily life. Cole remained perfectly calm. He tapped his tablet one more time. Mrs. Ellison, he said, his voice cutting through her shouting. We are not making anything up, and we are not relying on hearsay. The large screen on the wall flickered. The spreadsheet disappeared. In its place, a video began to play. It was high definition. The angle was wide, capturing the entire living room of the Ellison house. On screen, Vivian was standing over me. I was holding a tea tray. Clatter. The tea spilled. Then, the audio kicked in. It was crystal clear. You stupid girl! Vivian in the conference room froze. Her mouth hung open. She stared at the screen, watching herself lunge at me. Look what you did! Look at it! I told you to be careful. The video Vivian was a monster. Her face was contorted with rage. Her body language was threatening, violent. You are pathetic. You are 30 years old and you cannot even carry a tray of tea without destroying my home. In the conference room, nobody breathed. My father was staring at the screen, his eyes wide, his face pale as a sheet. He watched the video version of himself sitting in the chair, saying nothing, doing nothing. You are a burden. You ruin everything. Vivian turned away from the screen, her eyes darting around the room. She looked panicked, like a trapped animal. That is fake, she stammered. That is edited. You cut it to make me look bad. We were joking. It was a joke. Cole looked at her. Mrs. Ellison, this file has a verified digital timestamp. It was recorded 3 nights ago. It has not been altered. The video played on. It reached the part where Vivian turned on my father. Shut up. Greg, do not defend her. You always baby her. She is a useless, clumsy disaster. My father in the conference room let out a small, wounded sound. He looked from the screen to the real Vivian standing beside him. He looked at her hands, the hands that had squeezed his, that had cooked his meals, that had signed his checks. He looked at me. He saw the daughter he had failed to protect. Then, the video angle changed. It switched to the hallway view, Lena's phone recording. The perspective shifted. Now, we were looking over Vivian's shoulder. We could see the back of her head, her aggressive stance. We could see my face, calm and still, and in the corner of the frame, we could see my father, burying his face in his hands. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute. My father slowly pushed his chair back. He stood up. His legs were shaking, but he stood. He looked at Vivian. He did not look afraid anymore. He looked devastated. Is that what you think of her?" he whispered. Vivian scrambled to fix it. "Greg, honey, listen to me. I was just upset. It was the rug. You know how I get about the rug. Kaylee provoked me. She did it on purpose." My father shook his head slowly. He pointed at the black screen. "I sat there," he said, his voice cracking. "I sat there and I let you talk to her like she was a dog." He looked down at his hands. I thought you were protecting us. I thought you were tough because you had to be, but you just hate her." He looked up, tears standing in his eyes. "And if you hate her, and you steal from me, then who are you?" Vivian's eyes narrowed. The panic was replaced by a cold, hard realization that her charm offensive had failed. She realized she couldn't manipulate Greg in this moment, so she turned her rage on the only other target available. She whipped her head around to glare at me. Her eyes were full of pure, distilled hatred. Then, her gaze shifted slightly. She looked past me, to Lena. She replayed the video in her mind, the second angle, the hallway view. She remembered seeing Lena standing in the hallway that night. She remembered thinking Lena was just watching. Her eyes widened. She looked at me, then back at the screen, then at Lena. She realized the tea hadn't just slipped. She realized that I hadn't cowered. She realized that Lena hadn't intervened because Lena was the documentation crew. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "You set me up." I looked back at her, my face completely calm. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just held her gaze. "It wasn't a setup. Vivian," I said softly, "it was a security audit, and you failed." The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was not the peaceful silence of a library or the comfortable silence of a long drive. It was the vacuum left after an explosion. The screen on the wall had gone black, but the image of Vivian screaming at me, her face contorted with a rage that bordered on demonic, seemed burned into the retina of everyone present. My father was the first to move. He did not look at me. He did not look at Lena. He turned his entire body toward Vivian, moving with the slow, stiff articulation of a man waking up from a very long, very deep coma. "Vivian," he said. His voice was quiet, devoid of the trembling fear that usually defined his interactions with her. "Why is the retirement account empty?" Vivian blinked, her eyes wide and wet. She had expected him to ask about the screaming. She had expected him to ask about the abuse. She had prepared defenses for those accusations, stress, provocation, my clumsiness, but she had not expected him to bypass the emotion and go straight to the math. "Greg, honey," she started, her voice trembling with a practiced fragility. "You do not understand. I moved it to protect it. The market has been so volatile. I put it in the LLC to keep it safe from inflation, from taxes." My father picked up the sheet of paper Cole had placed in front of him. He read the line item at the top. $10,000 to a resort in Arizona, he read aloud. $4,800 to Bayside Jewelers. $1,200 for a lease on a Lexus. He looked up at her. "Is that inflation, Vivian? Or is that you spending my life savings?" Vivian's face crumpled. It was a masterful performance. Within seconds, real tears were streaming down her cheeks. She slumped in her chair, looking small and victimized, a stark contrast to the predator we had just watched on the video screen. "I did it for us," she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "You do not know what it is like, Greg. The pressure. I have to manage everything. The house, the bills, the maintenance. You just sit there and let me worry about everything. I needed a break. I needed to feel like I was not drowning." She turned to point a shaking hand at me. "And her. She is the reason. She is always asking for money. She is always causing problems. I had to hide the money so she would not guilt you into giving it all to her. She is unstable. Greg, look at her. She dragged us here to a lawyer's office to humiliate me. She wants to destroy our marriage because she is jealous. She has always hated me. I sat perfectly still. The old Kaylee, the one who lived in that house for 18 years, would have jumped up to defend herself. She would have shouted that she never asked for money, that she was the one sending checks. She would have engaged in the emotional brawl Vivian was inviting. But I was not the old Kaylee. I was an analyst. And when the data contradicts the narrative, you do not argue with the storyteller. You simply present the spreadsheet. I slid a folder across the black granite table. It came to a stop directly in front of my father. "Dad," I said, my voice level and cool. "Open it." "Don't look at it." "Greg!" Vivian shrieked, reaching for the folder. "She is lying." Cole cleared his throat. It was a sharp, authoritative sound. "Mrs. Ellison, if you touch that folder, I will have security remove you from this building." Vivian froze, her hand hovering in midair. She looked at Cole, then at Greg. She slowly pulled her hand back. My father opened the folder. "Page 1, I said. "That is a text message from Vivian to me. Dated last November. She says the furnace exploded and you were freezing. She asked for $3,000. My father stared at the page. We replaced the furnace 5 years ago. Kaylee, it is under warranty. It never broke. Look at the date." "Dad," I said, "now look at the bank statement below it." He moved his finger down the page. Transfer from Kaylee Walker. $3,000. Debit card purchase. Nordstrom. $2,800. He turned the page. Page 2. I continued. January. Vivian texted me saying you needed emergency dental surgery. Bridge work. Not covered by insurance. $5,000. My father shook his head. "I have not been to the dentist in a year." "Look at the transfer," I said, "and look at the charge." He read it. Transfer from Kaylee Walker. $5,000. Transfer to Ellison Management, LLC. $5,000. I leaned forward. Vivian is right about one thing. Dad, I was sending money. But I was not taking it from you. I was sending my own savings, thinking I was keeping you warm and healthy. She took every cent of it. And then she took your pension on top of it. She has not been protecting the family from me. She has been using me as an excuse to rob you blind. Vivian stopped crying. The tears vanished, as if a tap had been turned off. She sat up straight, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her expression hardened into something cold and ugly. "So what?" she spat. "I deserve it. I put up with you for 15 years. I put up with your moody silence and your cheapness. I earned every penny of that money. You owe me, Greg." The admission hung in the air. She had stopped denying the theft and started justifying it. Cole stepped in. He did not look at Vivian. He looked entirely at my father. "Greg," Cole said gently, "here is the reality of the situation. You granted Vivian a durable power of attorney 3 years ago. That document gives her the legal right to access your accounts, sign checks in your name, and manage your assets. Currently, everything she has done, while morally reprehensible, has a veil of legality because you gave her permission to act as your agent." My father looked terrified. So she can just keep doing it?" "No," Cole said. He slid a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper across the table. "Not if you sign this." My father looked at the document. "What is it?" "It is a formal revocation of power of attorney," Cole explained. "It states that effective immediately, Vivian Ellison no longer has the authority to act on your behalf. It freezes her out of your individual accounts. It notifies the banks that any further transactions authorized by her are fraud." Cole slid a second document over. "And this is a request to dissolve the joint holding company, demanding a full accounting of assets. If she refuses to return the funds, we file a civil suit for conversion and breach of fiduciary duty." Vivian laughed. It was a shrill, harsh sound. "You think he will sign that? He cannot even decide what to have for dinner without me. He is weak. He needs me. She turned to my father, her eyes boring into his. Greg, do not be an idiot. You cannot handle this. You know you cannot. You will be lost without me. Who is going to cook for you? Who is going to make sure you take your pills? You are going to sign a paper that makes your wife a stranger? After everything we have been through? My father looked at the pen lying on the table. He looked at his trembling hands. He looked at the spreadsheet full of red lines, the geography of his stolen life. Then he looked at me. He did not see the 15-year-old girl who spilled the tea. He saw a woman who had built a career, who had saved money, and who had come back into the lion's den to pull him out. He picked up the pen. Vivian gasped, Greg, if you sign that, I am leaving. I mean it. I will walk out that door and you will never see me again. You will die alone in that house. My father's hand shook as he brought the pen to the paper. He hesitated for a second, the fear of abandonment clearly warring with the clarity of the betrayal. Then he spoke, his voice low but steady. I would rather be alone, he said, than be with someone who looks at me and sees a bank account. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name, Gregory A. Ellison. He signed the second document, then he put the pen down and pushed the papers toward Cole. There, he said, exhaling a breath that sounded like it had been held for a decade. It is done. I will not let anyone, not even my wife, spend my money in ways I do not understand. Not anymore. Cole nodded and immediately pulled the papers into his stack. I will file these with the county clerk within the hour. The banks will be notified by close of business today. Mrs. Ellison, your access is terminated. Vivian stared at the papers. Her face went through a spectrum of colors, red, then pale, then a splotchy purple. She realized that the financial control she had exerted for years had just evaporated with the scratch of a pen. She stood up, knocking her chair over. You will regret this, she hissed. Both of you. She grabbed her purse and her binder. She looked at me with a gaze that was pure venom. You think you have won? You think because you have some spreadsheets and a lawyer friend that you can destroy me? You forget who I am. Kaylee, I know everyone in this town. I know your aunts. I know your cousins. I know the neighbors. She pulled her phone out of her purse and waved it like a weapon. I am going to tell them everything, she threatened. I am going to tell them how you abused me, how you manipulated a senile old man to cut off his wife. I will tell them you are mentally unstable. I will post it on Facebook. I will tell the church group. I will ruin your reputation. Kaylee, by the time I am done, you will not be able to show your face in Harborview. You will be the greedy stepdaughter who threw a widow out on the street. Cole stood up. Mrs. Ellison, I would advise you against that. Defamation is actionable. Actionable? Vivian laughed. It is my opinion. Freedom of speech. Let's see you sue me for crying on the internet. She turned and stormed out of the conference room. The heavy glass door slammed shut behind her. The silence returned, but this time it was lighter. My father looked at me. Is she really going to do that? I looked at the empty chair where she had been sitting. Yes, Dad. It is the only weapon she has left. She has lost the money. She has lost the control. Now she will try to burn the earth. I stood up and walked over to him, putting a hand on his shoulder. But do not worry, I said. Let her post. Greg looked at me, confused. But Kaylee, the neighbors, the family, they believe her. They always believe her. I smiled, a tired but sharp smile. Not this time. Dad, this time, we brought receipts. By the time I drove my father home, he refused to ride with Vivian, and honestly, I did not think she would have waited for him. The notification popped up on my phone. It was 7 in the evening. Vivian had wasted no time. I sat at my father's kitchen table. He was in the living room, staring at the blank television, exhausted. Lena sat across from me, her laptop open. Here it is, Lena said, her voice grim. Posted 20 minutes ago. Already has 40 likes and 12 comments. She turned the laptop around. Vivian's Facebook post was a masterpiece of fiction. It was long, rambling, and punctuated with crying emojis. My heart is absolutely shattered tonight. It began. I never thought I would be betrayed by the people I devoted my life to. Today, my stepdaughter Kaylee, who has always harbored so much anger toward me, finally succeeded in manipulating my husband against me. She dragged him to a lawyer and forced him to cut me off, leaving me with nothing after I spent years nursing him and caring for his home. I scrolled down. It is so painful to be accused of stealing when every penny I spent was to keep this family afloat. Kaylee is obsessed with money. She has always been jealous of the love Greg and I share. I am asking for prayers tonight as I face this cruelty. I don't know where I will go or what I will do. I am being victimized by a woman who has lost her way. The comments were predictable. "Oh my God, Vivian, that is terrible," wrote Mrs. Gable from down the street. "Some children are just snakes," wrote my Aunt Sarah. "We are here for you. Honey, stay strong. Viv, the truth always comes out," wrote the pastor's wife. My father walked into the kitchen. He saw us looking at the screen. "Is it bad?" he asked. "It is exactly what we expected," I said. "She is playing the victim. She is controlling the narrative because she thinks we are too polite to fight back." I looked at Lena. "Are you ready?" Lena nodded. "The file is prepped. Faces blurred, personal info redacted, just the transcript and the clip." I pulled out my phone. I opened my own social media app. I had never used it for anything other than sharing articles about data science or photos of sunsets. I had never posted about my family. I began to type. My fingers moved steadily. I did not use emotional language. I did not call her names. I did not ask for pity. I wrote like an analyst writing a final report. I usually keep my personal life private. I wrote, "But today, serious allegations were made regarding my character and my family's financial situation. I believe that the truth is not a matter of opinion, but a matter of evidence." I attached 3 images. Image 1. A redacted bank statement showing the transfer of $5,000 from my account, labeled, "For Dad's dental surgery," next to a transfer of the exact same amount to Ellison Management LLC, and a subsequent credit card payment to a luxury resort. Image 2. A copy of the check to Bayside Jewelers, dated 2 days after she claimed they could not afford property taxes. And then, the video. I had edited it carefully. I blurred my father's face to protect his dignity. I blurred the background to keep the focus on the action. It was a 30-second clip. It started with the sound of the teapot hitting the rug. Then Vivian's voice, clear and shrieking, "You stupid girl! You are a burden! You ruin everything!" It showed her lunging. It showed the aggression. It showed the unmasked rage of a woman who claimed to be a nurturing victim. I captioned the post simply, "There are 2 sides to every story. This is the side that happens when she thinks no one is watching." Today, my father took control of his own finances to stop years of documented embezzlement and emotional abuse. We ask for privacy as we heal. I hit post. I sat back and watched the screen. For the first minute, nothing happened. Then, a notification. "Lena Ward shared your post." Then another. "Cole Ramirez shared your post." Then, the comments on Vivian's post stopped. I refreshed Vivian's page. Mrs. Gable's comment, "Oh my God, Vivian, that is terrible," had been deleted. A new comment appeared under Vivian's post, from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Vivian, I just saw Kaylee's video. Is that you screaming at her?" Another comment appeared. "Wait, you spent the tax money on jewelry? Is that true?" I watched the tide turn in real time. It was fascinating. Social media is an emotional amplifier, but it is also a court of public opinion that despises being lied to. Vivian had overplayed her hand. She had banked on the fact that I would stay silent, that I would be too ashamed to air our dirty laundry. She had forgotten that shame thrives in the dark, but it dies in the light. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Aunt Sarah, the one who had called me a snake in the comments 5 minutes ago. "Kaylee, honey, I am so confused. I just saw your post. Did she really say those things to you?" I had no idea. Call me? I did not reply. I turned the phone over and placed it face down on the table. Vivian was currently sitting somewhere, probably at a friend's house, or maybe in a hotel room paid for with the last of her credit limit, watching her support system evaporate. She was watching the likes disappear. She was watching the sympathy turn to interrogation. She had tried to turn the town against me. Instead, she had handed them the evidence of her own duplicity. My father sat down at the table. He looked at the black phone case. "Is it over?" he asked. "The legal part is just starting," I said. "But the secret? The secret is dead. Dad, she cannot hurt us with words anymore. Everyone knows." He nodded slowly. He looked around the kitchen, his kitchen, which was quiet now. There was no perfume smell. There was no tension. He reached out and took my hand. "Thank you," he said. I squeezed his hand back. I looked at Lena. She gave me a small, tired smile and closed her laptop. The courtroom of public opinion had adjourned, and for the first time in my life, the verdict was in my favor. The week following the confrontation at Cole's office was a study in desperation. Vivian Ellison was like a trapped animal, and like any creature that realizes the walls are closing in. She did not reflect on her actions. She lashed out. She realized that the courtroom of public opinion was turning against her. So she attempted to regain control of the only territory that still mattered to her wallet: my father's mind. She cornered him in the house 2 days after she signed the papers. I was not there, but my father recounted the scene to me later with a mixture of exhaustion and surprising clarity. She had waited until he was watching the evening news, then knelt by his chair, weeping, clutching his hands, invoking the 15 years they had spent together. She talked about the vacations they took, the meals she cooked, the times she nursed him through the flu. She tried to overwrite the cold, hard data of the bank statements with a warm, fuzzy wash of nostalgia. She blamed me. Of course, she told him I was a poison in his ear, a bitter woman determined to wreck his happiness because I could not find my own. But the spell was broken. My father, a man who had spent a decade nodding in agreement to avoid conflict, finally found his spine. He told her that if she wanted to discuss their marriage, they could talk, but if she wanted to discuss money, or the house, or the future, she would have to do it in the presence of his daughter or his lawyer. He effectively stripped her of her role as the household treasurer. To Vivian, that was not just a logistical change, it was an eviction from the seat of power. She realized she could no longer dip her hand into the stream of his pension, and that realization made her dangerous. I should have known she would try to hit me where she thought I was vulnerable. Vivian could not attack my relationship with my father anymore, so she decided to attack my livelihood. On Tuesday morning, I was sitting in my office at Horizon Analytics, reviewing a dataset for a logistics client, when I received an urgent calendar invite from the Director of Human Resources. The subject line was blank. My stomach tightened. In the corporate world, a meeting with HR with no subject line is never good news. I walked into the HR office 10 minutes later. The director, a woman named Sarah, who I had known for 5 years, looked uncomfortable. She turned her monitor around. "Kaylee," she said, her voice professional but strained. "We received an anonymous whistleblower complaint this morning. It is quite serious. I have to show it to you." I leaned in. It was an email sent from a generic, throwaway address. The subject line read, "Urgent, fraudulent activity by senior staff." The text of the email was a masterpiece of malicious fiction. It claimed that I, Kaylee Walker, had been systematically embezzling funds from Horizon Analytics by inflating vendor invoices and diverting the difference to personal accounts to support a gambling addiction and family debts. It claimed that I was unstable, that I had been erratic lately, and that the company needed to audit my department immediately before I caused more damage. I read the words, and I felt a cold, hard rage settle in my chest. It was not fear. If I had been guilty, I would have been afraid. But I was innocent, and more importantly, I was a data security expert. "Sarah," I said, standing up straight. "This is a lie. You know my record. You know my audit scores." "We do," Sarah said, "and honestly, the claims are vague and do not match our internal controls. But because it is a formal accusation of fraud, we have to investigate. We have to put you on administrative leave pending a digital forensic review." I looked at the screen again. I looked at the timestamps. "Do not put me on leave yet," I said, my voice calm. "Give me 10 minutes. Kaylee, I cannot let you access the system if—" "Sarah," I interrupted, "this email came from an external source. If I can prove the source has a direct conflict of interest and malicious intent, will you delay the suspension?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. 10 minutes. I walked back to my desk. I did not touch the company financial data. Instead, I opened my personal terminal, the one I used for security research. I pulled the raw header data from the email Sarah had forwarded to me. The sender thought they were being clever by using a throwaway email service, but Vivian was a woman of the 80s, not a digital native. She did not understand how the internet worked. She did not use a VPN. She did not mask her routing. I traced the originating IP address in 30 seconds. It was a residential IP provided by the local cable internet provider. I ran a geolocation query. It pinned the location to a 3-block radius in North Harborview. I opened my own logs, the ones I kept of the devices that logged into my father's home Wi-Fi. A security measure I had installed months ago to help him with the slow internet. I matched the external IP address of the email sender to the external IP address of the router at 42 Oak Creek Drive, my father's house. Then I checked the device ID. It wasn't my father's iPad. It wasn't his phone. It was a MacBook Air, registered to Vivian's laptop. Finally, I checked the time. The email was sent at 9:45 in the morning. I pulled up the text messages from my father. At 9:30, he had texted me a photo of himself sitting in the waiting room of his cardiologist's office, asking me if I wanted to grab lunch later. He was not home. Vivian was the only person in that house. I printed the logs. I printed the IP trace. I printed the device identification match. I walked back into Sarah's office and laid the papers on her desk. "The call is coming from inside the house. Sarah," I said, literally, "this email was sent from my father's home internet connection, from a laptop belonging to my stepmother, at a time when my father was at the doctor. My stepmother and I are currently in the middle of a hostile legal dispute regarding her misappropriation of family funds. This is retaliation." Sarah looked at the data. She looked at me. She typed the IP address into her own verification tool. "Okay," she said, exhaling slowly. "Okay, this changes things. This is not a whistleblower. This is harassment." I went back to my desk and called Cole. My hand was shaking, not from nerves, but from the sheer audacity of what Vivian had tried to do. She had tried to take my job. She had tried to destroy the career I had built from nothing, the only thing that kept me independent of her. Cole picked up on the first ring. "She crossed the line," I said. "She sent a fake fraud report to my HR department." Cole did not ask for details. He did not ask if I was sure. He knew. "Send me the trace logs," he said, his voice dropping to a tone I had never heard before. Pure, predatory, legal aggression. That is tortious interference with a business contract. That is defamation per se. And given the context of the financial abuse, it is grounds for an immediate emergency restraining order. She is escalating. Kaylee, we need to cut her off completely. I sent him the files. I spent the rest of the afternoon working, but my mind was already in court. That evening, Lena came over to my apartment. We sat on the balcony, watching the city lights. "She is not going to stop," Lena said. "She thinks she can control the narrative because she thinks families keep secrets. She thinks you are too embarrassed to let the aunts and cousins know what is really happening." "She is right," I admitted. "I do not want to drag everyone into this." Lena shook her head. "You are not dragging them in. You are inoculating them. If you do not tell them the truth, Vivian will fill the silence with lies. You saw that Facebook post." Lena pulled out her phone. "I propose a surgical strike," she said. "No public posts, no drama. Just a message to the family group chat. The one with Aunt Sarah, Uncle Mike, and the cousins. We send a redacted summary. We explain that Vivian is lashing out because she lost access to the money. We attach the clip of the hallway video, just the audio of her screaming, maybe, and the proof of the HR email. We caption it. Just so you know the truth before the rumors start. It felt aggressive. It felt like stooping to her level. But then I remembered the HR meeting. I remembered the feeling of Sarah looking at me with suspicion. Vivian had tried to starve me out. Do it, I said. Lena hit send. The reaction was almost immediate. My phone started buzzing, but it was not angry messages. It was shock. Aunt Sarah, the one who had defended Vivian on Facebook, sent a text. Oh my God, I had no idea she was like this. The way she screamed at you. Kaylee, I am so sorry I didn't believe you. Then, a message from my cousin Mark. She tried to get you fired? That is insane. Do you need anything? And finally, late that night, a message from my great-aunt Lydia, the matriarch of the extended family. If you need a character witness, tell your lawyer to call me. I never liked how she talked to your father, but I never knew it was this bad. We are with you. The tide had turned. Vivian had lost the audience she performed for. 2 days later, we were in court. It was a small hearing room, not the grand courtroom from the movies, but the authority of the law was palpable. The judge was a middle-aged woman with glasses and a face that suggested she had heard every lie ever told by a human being. Vivian was there with a lawyer she must have hired at the last minute, a man who looked disheveled and unprepared. Vivian herself looked diminished. Without the expensive jewelry, which Cole had insisted remain in the house as disputed assets, and without the confidence of her financial control. She looked older. She looked bitter. Cole presented the case efficiently. He did not use flowery language. He used data. Your Honor, he said, we are requesting a permanent restraining order against Vivian Ellison on behalf of Kaylee Walker. The respondent has engaged in a pattern of financial theft, verbal abuse, and now, malicious interference with the petitioner's employment. He handed the judge the file containing the IP trace of the email. This email, sent to Ms. Walker's employer, contained demonstrably false accusations of felony fraud. It was sent from the respondent's home, from her personal computer. Its intent was clearly to cause Ms. Walker to lose her livelihood. The judge reviewed the papers. She pushed her glasses up her nose. She looked at Vivian. Mrs. Ellison, did you send this email? Vivian stood up. Her voice was shaky. Your Honor, I was just concerned. I heard rumors that Kaylee was in trouble with money. I thought the company should know. I was trying to protect the family name from a scandal. It was a misunderstanding. My father was sitting next to me. He stood up when Cole gestured to him. Mr. Ellison, the judge asked, did you share any concerns about your daughter's finances with your wife? Did you authorize this contact with her employer? My father looked at Vivian. He saw the woman who had isolated him for a decade. No, Your Honor, he said clearly, my daughter is the most responsible person I know. My wife did this because I stopped letting her spend my pension. She told me she would ruin Kaylee, and she tried. Vivian gasped. Greg, how can you say that? The judge banged her gavel once. It was a dull thud that silenced the room. The evidence is clear. The judge said, this was not an act of concern. It was a calculated act of malice designed to inflict financial and professional harm. It is an escalation of the abuse documented in the video evidence provided to this court. She signed a paper. I am granting the permanent restraining order. Mrs. Ellison, you are to have no contact with Ms. Walker. You are not to go within 500 feet of her home or her place of employment. You are not to contact her employer, her colleagues, or her friends. Any necessary communication regarding the separation of assets will go strictly through counsel. If you violate this order, you will be arrested. Do you understand? Vivian nodded, her face pale. Yes. The hearing was over. It had taken less than 20 minutes to dismantle the reign of terror that had lasted 15 years. We walked out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Vivian was waiting by the elevator. She looked at us as we approached. There was no anger left in her face, just a hollow, confused bitterness. She looked at me, really looked at me, as if trying to reconcile the quiet teenager she used to bully with the woman who had just legally crushed her. She stepped forward, ignoring her lawyer's hand on her arm. "You really did all this," she whispered, her voice rasping. "You destroyed our family. You dragged your father through the mud. And for what? Just because I yelled at you over a cup of tea?" I stopped. I looked at her. I felt a sense of calm so profound it felt like weightlessness. "It was never about the tea. Vivian," I said softly. I stepped closer, ignoring the 500-foot rule for just 1 second to make sure she heard me. "It was for the 15 years you made me feel small. It was for the money you stole from my father. It was for every time you told me I was a burden." I smiled, a small, sad smile. The tea was just the first time I had a camera rolling. Vivian stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She realized then that she had not been defeated by a clumsy accident. She had been defeated by a long, slow accumulation of her own sins, captured and reflected back at her. She turned and walked into the elevator. The doors closed, cutting her out of our view, and effectively, out of our lives. My father let out a long sigh. He leaned against the wall. "I am sorry, Kaylee," he said. "I am so sorry I let it get to this point. I should have stopped her years ago." I put my arm around him. "You stopped her today, Dad. That is what matters." He nodded. He looked at me with a newfound respect. "I want to call Cole tomorrow," he said. "I want to redo the will. I want to set up a trust. I want to make sure that no matter what happens to me, nobody can ever take what belongs to you again. And I want you to help me write it. I do not want to sign anything I do not understand ever again." I squeezed his shoulder. "We will do it together, Dad." We walked toward the exit. Lena was waiting for us by the doors. She was holding her phone. "Did you record it?" I asked her as we walked out into the bright afternoon sun. Lena looked at the phone, then at me. She tapped the screen. "I did," she said. "But you know what? I do not think we need to post this one." She held the phone up. The video of the hallway, the video that had started it all, was still there. It had been the weapon we needed, but the war was over. "We do not need to prove anything to anyone anymore," Lena said. "We won." I looked at the phone, then at the street ahead of us. The air smelled of exhaust and city dust, but to me, it smelled like freedom. "Delete it," I said. Lena smiled and pressed the button. We walked down the steps of the courthouse, leaving the digital ghost of Vivian Ellison behind us, deleted and gone, while the real version of my life, the one where I was safe, successful, and heard, stretched out in front of me, wide open. 3 weeks after the judge granted the permanent restraining order, my father came to my apartment for dinner. It was the first time he had ever visited me here, for the 3 years I had lived in this building, high above the harbor. He had always found an excuse not to come. The drive was too long, or his back hurt, or Vivian needed him for something urgent. Tonight, there were no excuses. There was no Vivian. I buzzed him in and watched on the security monitor as he stepped out of the elevator. He looked different. He was wearing a jacket I had never seen before. Something casual and comfortable, not the stiff, buttoned-up cardigans Vivian always laid out for him. He held a bottle of wine in one hand and a small potted plant in the other. When I opened the door, the air that drifted in from the hallway was neutral. It smelled of floor polish and recycled air conditioning. It did not smell of lavender. It did not smell of heavy, cloying perfume. "Welcome home, Dad," I said, stepping aside. He walked in, his eyes widening as he took in the space. He looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the city skyline. He looked at my minimalist white sofa, the glass coffee table, the wall of monitors in my office that was visible through the open door. "It is quiet," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the open-plan living room. "It is very peaceful. Kaylee." I took the plant from him, a small succulent, the kind that is hard to kill. "I thought you might like something green," he said, sounding shy. "The florist said it thrives on neglect." I thought that was funny, considering. He gave a small, dry chuckle. It was the first time I had heard him make a joke in years. "I cooked dinner myself. I made salmon with roasted asparagus and wild rice. I did not make pot roast. I did not make anything that would remind us of the dining table at the old house." We sat at my small round table by the window, watching the ferries cut lines of white foam across the dark water of the harbor. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about safe things. We talked about the weather. We talked about the traffic. We talked about the new trust fund Cole had set up for him. Then, my father put his fork down. He took a sip of wine and looked out at the city lights. "I watched the video again," he said. I stopped eating. I did not ask which video. There was only one. "I watched the full version," he continued, not looking at me. "The one Lena took. I paused it. I zoomed in. Not on Vivian, on me." He turned to look at me. His eyes were clear, but rimmed with red. I looked at myself sitting in that chair. Kaylee. I saw a man who was physically present but spiritually absent. I saw my daughter being screamed at, humiliated, treated like an intruder in her own home, and I saw myself just sitting there. I looked at my hands. I looked at the floor. I did absolutely nothing. He took a breath, his voice shaking. That was the hardest part, realizing that the villain in the video was not just the woman screaming, it was the man saying nothing. Silence is an action. Kaylee, I know that now. I chose to be silent because it was easier for me. I sacrificed you to keep my own peace, and I will never forgive myself for that. I looked at him. I saw the lines on his face, deeper than they used to be. I saw the shame that he was finally carrying, instead of forcing me to carry it for him. "I am not looking for a perfect apology, Dad," I said quietly, "and I am not looking for a time machine. We cannot fix what happened when I was 15. We cannot fix the tuition money or the years I felt alone." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "But you are not silent now. That is what matters. You signed the papers. You stood up in court. You told the truth to the judge. You made a choice." "It felt like I was cutting off a limb," he admitted, but then I realized the limb was already gangrenous. He pulled a folder out of his jacket pocket. "Cole sent these over this morning," he said, "the final drafts." I cleared the plates, and we spread the documents out on the table. They were the instruments of his liberation. The first document was the establishment of the Ellison Revocable Trust. It placed all of his assets, his house, his pension, his savings, into a protected entity. He was the beneficiary, but the trustee was an independent fiduciary firm in Boston. This meant that even if Vivian somehow wormed her way back into his life, even if she manipulated him emotionally, she could not touch the money. He literally could not give it to her if he wanted to without the approval of a third-party financial officer. The second document was a revised will. It stated clearly that upon his death, the house would be sold, and the proceeds, along with the trust, would go to me. It explicitly disinherited Vivian Ellison, citing the restraining order and the documented financial abuse as cause. "This ensures she has no reason to stay," my father said, tapping the paper. "If she is waiting for me to die so she can cash out, she is going to be waiting for nothing." He signed them. I signed as a witness. We sat back. The paper trail was complete. The wall was built. "How is the family?" I asked. My father grimaced. "Well, Aunt Sarah called me yesterday. She said Vivian tried to call her, crying about how she was homeless and starving. Sarah told her that she had seen the bank statements you posted. She told Vivian to get a job." I allowed myself a small smile. "And your cousin Mark," he added, "he said he saw Vivian at the grocery store. She tried to come up to him in the produce aisle. Mark just turned his cart around and walked away. He didn't say a word to her. I think that hurt her more than if he had yelled." Vivian thrived on conflict. She knew how to handle shouting matches. She knew how to play the victim when people were aggressive. but she did not know how to handle indifference. She did not know how to handle being deleted. We finished the wine. When my father left, he hugged me. It was not the quick, side hug he used to give me when Vivian was watching. It was a real hug, tight and lingering. "I am proud of you. Kaylee," he whispered. "You saved us." I watched him walk down the hallway to the elevator. He walked a little straighter than he had in years. An hour later, my doorbell rang again. It was Lena. She breezed in carrying a bottle of champagne and a bag of takeout dessert. I saw Uncle Greg leaving the building, she said, kicking off her shoes. He looked lighter. "Did he sign the papers?" "He signed." I said, "It is done. The trust is active. Vivian is locked out forever." Lena popped the champagne cork. It hit the ceiling, and we both laughed. "To the tea," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "I firmly believe that the Smithsonian needs to open a new wing dedicated to family justice. And the centerpiece should be a replica of that spilled Earl Grey. We can put a little plaque next to it. The stain that cleaned the house." I took the glass, the bubbles fizzing against my nose. "It really is amazing," I said, looking at the golden liquid. 15 years of control, of manipulation, of fear, and it all came crashing down because of a few drops of liquid and a camera phone. Lena looked at me over the rim of her glass. Her expression shifted. The humor faded, replaced by a look of conspiratorial respect. "You know," she said softly, "I was looking through our old texts today, from 2 months ago." I stiffened slightly. I knew which texts she meant. "I found the one you sent me after you found the bank statements," she continued. I nodded. I remembered it perfectly. Text from Kaylee. "I have the financial data. It proves the theft, but it is dry. It is just numbers. He won't feel it. He needs to see it. I need to show him the monster." Text from Lena. "So show him. How do we trigger her?" Text from Kaylee. "She has a trigger. The T. It is the original trauma. If I replicate the accident from when I was 15, she will replicate the abuse. She won't be able to help herself." Text from Lena. "I will stand in the hall. 45-degree angle. I will get the wide shot. You just make sure you drop it." I looked at Lena. She was smiling. A sharp, knowing smile. "It wasn't an accident, Kaylee," she said. I took a sip of champagne. "No," I admitted. "It wasn't." I thought back to that moment in the living room. I remembered the weight of the silver tray. I remembered the heat of the teapot. I remembered feeling my wrist relax, deliberately, precisely. I remembered calculating the trajectory. I remembered aiming for the rug. I had not stumbled. I had executed a command. I was an analyst. I had identified a system vulnerability, Vivian's temper, and I had designed a penetration test to exploit it. I knew exactly what she would say. I knew exactly how she would react. I had scripted the entire encounter, and she had read her lines perfectly. "Does that make me as bad as her?" I asked, the question that had been nagging me for weeks finally spoken aloud. That I manipulated the situation? That I set a trap? Lena shook her head fiercely. "No, you didn't make her scream. Kaylee, you didn't make her steal the money. You didn't make her abuse your father. All you did was turn on the lights. If she was a decent person, spilling tea would have just resulted in a wet rug. The fact that it resulted in a psychotic break is on her. Not you. You just ensured there was a witness." She clinked her glass against mine. "You didn't build the bomb, cousin. You just stopped trying to catch it with your bare hands and let it hit the floor so everyone could hear the explosion." We sat there for a long time, finishing the champagne, talking about the future. Lena was going to law school in the fall. She said watching Cole work had inspired her. I was going back to Horizon the next day. My suspension had been lifted, and Sarah from HR had sent me a formal apology letter along with a bonus for the undue stress. When Lena left, it was past midnight. The apartment was quiet again. I cleaned up the glasses. I put the leftover salmon in the fridge. I walked over to the kettle. I filled it with water and set it on the stove. I waited for the whistle. I reached into the cupboard and pulled out a box of tea. Earl Grey, the same brand we used to drink at the big house. I brewed a cup. I watched the dark amber liquid swirl in the white ceramic. The smell of bergamot rose up with the steam. For years, that smell had made my stomach turn. It had smelled like fear. It had smelled like failure. I picked up the saucer. I walked into my living room. I stood in the center of the room, holding the cup. My hands were steady, but then I let a memory in. I let myself remember the feeling of Vivian's hand on my wrist, the spit flying from her mouth, the feeling of being small and worthless. My hand trembled, just a little. The china rattled softly, a tiny clink-clink against the saucer. I watched the tea ripple. It threatened to spill over the edge. But I did not panic. I did not freeze. I did not look over my shoulder for a woman who was coming to destroy me. I took a deep breath. I steadied my hand. The rattling stopped. The liquid settled. I looked out the window at the city of Harborview. Somewhere out there, in a cheap motel or a friend's guest room, Vivian Ellison was sleeping, or perhaps lying awake, wondering how she had lost everything. She had written a title for my life. She had named it "Stepmother Beat Me for Spilling Tea." She had meant beat in the physical sense, or perhaps in the sense of defeat. She thought she had beaten me down. But as I stood there, safe in the home I owned, protected by the laws I had invoked, and surrounded by the silence I had chosen, I realized the title had a different meaning now. She didn't beat me, I beat her. And I did it with the very weapon she thought she could use to control me. I raised the cup to my lips and took a sip. The tea was hot, bitter, and floral. It burned my tongue slightly, a clean, sharp sensation. It tasted like victory. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, but I wanted to share every detail to show that even when you feel trapped, there is always a way out if you are willing to look for the pattern. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I love reading about all the different places our community comes from, and I want to know if you've ever had to deal with a toxic family member like Vivian. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel for more real-life dramas. Hit that like button if you enjoyed Kaylee's victory, and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who might need to hear it.